Hi, my name is Khadijah Whitmore. I am a public relations graduate student at Full Sail University. This video is going to be talking about a defamation case study where I will be analyzing two defamation case studies, the New York Times versus Sullivan and Gertz versus Welch. My agenda will be to discuss the New York Times versus Sullivan case. I will go over the case details and also discuss the U.S. Supreme Court decision. Then I will go into Gertz versus Welch and talk about the case details for that, and then go into the U.S. Supreme Court decision. I will then discuss Florida's defamation laws and my takeaways from both cases. So in the New York Times versus Sullivan case, there are two parties. You have L.B. Sullivan as the respondent and the New York Times as the petitioner. Sullivan sued the New York Times because of an advertisement that criticized the police department of Montgomery, Alabama, for the way it treated civil rights protesters. Some of the descriptions were accurate, but there were some false statements. Now, Sullivan did feel that his reputation was damaged by the New York Times publication. He felt like his reputation was damaged because the statement made in the advertisement referred to his duties that included supervision of the police department. So even though Sullivan was not directly named in this case, he still felt as though that this statement was damaging to him. So some of the key elements that go into a defamation claim: one, the statement must be false and not a matter of opinion. And that statement must also have been made to a third party. Because Sullivan was a public official, he had to prove that the defamer acted intentionally or recklessly. He needed to prove actual malice. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of the New York Times. Since Sullivan was a public figure, he had to prove actual malice, or that the New York Times knew the statements were false and made those statements anyways. Sullivan could not prove that the advertisement was related to him since it did not name him directly. Public figures have a better platform to address situations like this. So that means that those public figures have a greater burden to prove that the person who made the statement acted negligently. The Supreme Court upheld that the press has a right to criticize the actions of the government or its officials. So since Sullivan is or was a public figure at the time, the courts did find that the press is not liable for what they posted. They do have the right to criticize the government, in which case they did. Now moving on to Gertz versus Welch. The two parties in this case are Elmer Gertz as the petitioner and Robert Welch as the respondent. The petitioner in this case was a private figure. Elmer Gertz was an attorney that represented the family of Robert Nelson, a young man who was shot by Chicago police officer Ronald Nucio. Robert Welch was the publisher of the American Opinion magazine. So the alleged defamatory statements about Gertz in the American Opinion article stated that the testimony against the officer was false and that Gertz was part of a communist plot to discredit Chicago police. It also stated that Gertz was an officer of the National Lawyers Guild. A picture of Gertz was also included in the article. The caption under it was "Elmer Gertz of the Red Guild harasses Nucio." In this Supreme Court decision, they ruled in favor of Gertz. And one of their main reasons was there was no attempts to make sure that the information that was posted was false. The managing editor did not try to verify or substantiate the accusations. Within the article, they did have an introduction that stated that the author had conducted research on the case, but it was clear that no research was actually conducted for this article. Another factor that came into this was Hertz was a private figure. Therefore, he does not have to prove malice. All he has to do is prove that damages to his reputation um, happened. And as a result, I feel that Gertz's reputation was damaged. He was an attorney, and his main job is to defend people, and he could have easily been hurt by this because it damages his credibility as a lawyer and would make it difficult for him to gain clients or for people to trust that he is going to represent them adequately. So, just part of this analysis that I have on this case, avoiding the lawsuit, if I were in the role of Welch, I would have definitely made sure that I did my research before writing any statements. Although, even if I interpreted Gertz as a public figure, it's always just to be on the safe side, it's always best to make sure that any statements that I make are indeed true. And I was also would have really made sure that I understood whether or not Gertz was a public or private figure. I think that put a lot into this, where Welch may have felt that he could say what he wanted to say because Gertz was a public figure, but in actuality, he was a private figure. And then the best way to avoid any of these lawsuits or lawsuits such as this would be to conduct thorough and accurate research to prove my claims. Seeing as I live in the wonderful state of Florida, here are the Florida's defamation laws. So under Florida law, the elements of a defamation claim are: one, the defendant published a false statement. It has to be about the plaintiff to a third party, and the falsity of the statement caused injury to the plaintiff. So, as a person who lives in Florida, it's really important for me to understand what my state laws are so that I can make sure that anything that I'll publish about a private or public figure, that I know the laws so that I do not set myself up for a lawsuit. And then just my overall takeaways. While working in the communications industry, it's very important to know the laws in my state and also the federal laws that relate to my industry. So definitely defamation would be one of those things that I would make sure that I understand as a communications expert and professional. I would make sure that I do my research before I publish anything. And also making sure that I understand the difference between a public and private figure, because yes, while it is acceptable for me as a professional and me as a citizen to criticize our government and our government officials, I also have to also err on the side of caution to make sure that whatever that I am saying does not come back on me. And also, as a communications professional, I would want to make sure that I cover my bases and do my due diligence to have all the facts beforehand. I don't want to, as an individual, to damage my own credibility of spreading false statements, whether intentional or unintentional, that can be proven false. I feel that lawsuits can damage my reputation, and I want to make sure that whatever it is that I post, that I am very cognizant of it and making sure that I do my due diligence. Okay. Here you will see all the references that I used to conduct my research. I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation, And if you have any questions at all, you can also leave me comments here, and I'll be glad to entertain your questions and answer them to the best of my ability. Thank you.